For the past 30 years, we've seen the ANC holding on to its majority, which allowed it to largely shape policy here at home as well as abroad. Now, the picture has changed slightly as the party may need to negotiate policy positions with a coalition partner or even partners. So what does this mean then for some of the positions that the country has taken on the global stage? Professor Bhaso Ndzendze, Associate Professor of Political and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg, joins us now for this conversation. Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening. Given some of the different positions that we've seen when it comes to foreign policy, especially where some of the political parties are concerned, could this be a bargaining point, in your view, when it comes to coalition conversations?
Thanks, Bonge. Absolutely. I think what South Africans have delivered are parties that have varying views and even sharply contrasting views in terms of South Africa's foreign policy and the values that it ought to stand for in the world, and some of the sides, so to speak, that it should pick in certain conflicts. You have, for example, a DA that is very pro-Ukraine, and its leader has undertaken multiple visits to that country to showcase the DA's support and also engaged with the embassy of Ukraine here. On the other hand, you also have a party like the EFF, which in its manifesto calls for a reconsideration of South Africa's relations with Eswatini, a very close neighbor, and one which the ANC government has had very strong ties with. So there's a lot on the table here. And I would say also there's really a recognition that the embassies that are all over the world, upwards of 120 or something of that figure, are there to be staffed. There's a lot of contrasting views, especially from the DA side, about the way in which the ANC has gone about appointing ambassadors, some of whom are not qualified to hold those positions of ambassadors and high commissioners. While also there's a recognition that this is an opportunity when it comes to foreign policy to placate some MPs who didn't make it to parliament or didn't make it back to parliament, or didn't make it from all the various party lists, so that there could be a way to give these individuals soft landings, so to speak.
Quite interesting views there. I mean, I wonder then, what does it mean when it comes to geopolitical issues and South Africa's position with all these uncertainties?
I think it presents us a situation where whatever coalition government comes about, it might collapse not only on the basis of domestic policy disagreements, but also, I think, quite likely on foreign policy issues. There's a lot of landmines there. You can picture, for example, a DA coalition partner, disagreeing vehemently with the ANC's president or minister of foreign affairs, should the portfolio go to that particular party, or whichever party for that matter. It's also the case that foreign policy is no longer just centralized with DERCO these days. Almost every department has got a foreign affairs desk. And so you can picture even a department such as water and sanitation wanting to have closer relations with Israel, because Israel is a world leader in terms of desalination of seawater, because that may be a solution to look towards in terms of resolving a domestic issue, which is water scarcity or water shortages.
So, Prof, what does it mean for our voice then on a global stage? And I ask this against the backdrop, for example, of a South Africa that had a loud voice and spoke out very harshly against the hoarding of vaccines, for example, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also a South Africa that has been speaking with an amplified voice when it comes to the developments in the Middle East. So does that diminish our voice then, or are we going to even be able to find it in the midst of what you've just described?
So I think it really depends on the choice of coalition partner. I think if it is a party such as the EFF, the voice will be amplified. And I hypothesize in my article that an EFF coalition partner might actually make the ANC take an even tougher position and actually live up to some of the things it says in its own rhetoric. Same with the MK party, which actually, ironically, a lot of the current ANC's foreign policy was championed or introduced by President Jacob Zuma when he was president. So we might see an implication of that voice. The introduction of a potential DA coalition partner, however, changes things quite a bit. I think it would lead to I think, a much less coherent voice, because all these different views have to be accommodated between the DA, which, for example, thinks that its leader at least has said that, one man's genocide is another's freedom, whereas the DA, the ANC-led government, took Israel to the International Court of Justice for what it considered a genocide. The DA also thinks that the BRICS is a waste of time and a waste of money, and, quote, an unholy alliance. That's what its shadow minister of foreign affairs said last year during the summit, whereas the ANC thinks that the BRICS is an important coalition, international coalition. It's an international bloc that gives South Africa further voice. So we might see then a much dimmer South African voice, depending on whether it chooses the DA, or a louder voice depending on whether it chooses an EFF type or even an MKP type coalition.
And Prof, when I was reading your article earlier, there's something else that I found very interesting, and it's around the perception of South Africa when, it comes to countries outside of South Africa, for example, because, as you say, it matters who the ANC chooses as a coalition partner. So if then they choose incorrectly, how then does the international community then perceive us?
Huge quotes on incorrectly, right? Because it's all a matter of perception. So I think what will happen is that whoever is elected is appointed, and therefore whoever the ANC goes with in terms of coalition partner, certain things will continue. You will get a letter or message of congratulation for whoever becomes president, and pleasantries about looking forward to working together. There is, of course, this concern, especially in the West, that an EFF, MKP, ANC coalition will be bad for business. In fact, the Economist magazine, which is sort of the economic capitalist liberal Bible of the West, had a front page story last week about South Africa's election. But also, I would say, ironically, again, countries like China, which, although are perceived to be pro revisionism and are pro the kind of leftist policy program that the EFF, ANC, and even MKP put forward, that country itself is actually very critical of the BEE. And so I think they would actually secretly and quietly would like, insofar as their investing community goes, they would like to see a more, ironically, DA type coalition, whereas their rhetoric might be to the contrary in terms of the international stage, and would cause a lot of disagreement with the DA ANC coalition on political matters. But economically, I mean, many Chinese business people are on record, including from state-owned entities, asking the South African government to relax some of its BEE policies. So there's a lot of hypotheticals, a lot of possibilities, each with different trade-offs.
And briefly then, Prof, when it comes then to especially what you've just described now, and others would say, but how then do you say that the party has chosen incorrectly, given the fact that for us, this marks a turning point when it comes to foreign policy, and maybe should push ahead in order to reshape it?
I think countries will say South Africa, the ANC has chosen correctly or incorrectly based on their own interests. So I think the outside world, as I've said, the West definitely prefers a DA-ANC or ANC-DA coalition. That's without a doubt. On the other hand, some countries such as Russia, China, at a political level, would think an ANC-DA coalition is incorrect because it would take away a critical and powerful partner in the United Nations General Assembly and in the BRICS Association. So correctness and incorrectness is all relative to the different interests that different countries hold vis-a-vis South Africa.
It's going to be an interesting one, Prof, as you say. It's a catch-22. So whichever way you go, there's going to be a reaction. And I'm keen then to hear your thoughts when we then see finally what shape does this all take. And if you think, some of the perceptions from the other, places that maybe would see correct or incorrect. But thank you so much for your time. Do appreciate it, Prof. That is Professor Bhaso Ndzendze, Associate Professor of Political and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg.